Yeah, it's telling me we're on Facebook.
Are we on Facebook?
It looks like it. Yep, we are live. I can see it. Awesome. This is
We
the
made
first
it.
time this has worked in like 4 Facebook lives.
That's right. Well, I have to give a shout out to all the folks at Zoom that must be working pretty hard right about now, because it feels like half of the planet is on Zoom right now. So thank goodness for Zoom.
Yep. It's also a great time to be supporting them because they've taken their role really seriously, and I believe they've given it for free to all K-12 classrooms, which is amazing.
Wow. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Zoom right now. So, John, how are you? Little check-in. How are things in Vancouver right about now?
Good. Like we were talking about before, my circle sort of proactively shut down. Like we didn't wait to be told we had to. So I feel like we're a little bit ahead of the curve on everybody else. Like we shut down a couple of days before you're told to, and so like we've had a little bit more time to get used to it. And I feel like everybody's sort of where we were 4 or 5 days ago now. So it's kind of interesting.
4 days ahead. I've been I've been seeing some posts floating around like where I was like, I've been training all my life for this, right? Like because I'm an introvert now, I'm supposed to stay home. And I was actually thinking about it the other day that probably most of us have an advantage of sorts. Like right now, if you're not a parent, you're at a pretty big advantage. Or if you've been working remotely for the last 7 years, you're at a pretty big advantage. If you know how to use online tools, if you are homeschooling your children, if you're an introvert living in a small cabin in the woods already, I guess you might not even know about coronavirus, but there are definitely those like strengths and advantages to tap into.
Well, it's interesting because we've often joked that a lot of like fitness stuff is just the thing you used to do if you grew up poor, like skipping breakfast or whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you grew up working class right now, you have a real advantage that like we go to the grocery store once a week, and if there's not food in the house, you just have to wait. And you're like, I feel like my upbringing has served me greatly and given me a big advantage in being like, oh, cool. I guess I'll go to the grocery store in like 4 days and I'll make do until then.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of interest when we spoke with you and Tony and Sam last week about just selling and marketing in general. And folks really wanted to delve a bit deeper into what you do and how you approach alternative pricing with coaching. Folks not being able to afford your services, which could be described as quote unquote non-essential, especially compared to food on the table and roof over your head. So what tools have you been using? I think you've mentioned Patreon was one, which is kind of a support what you can artist creative community.
Yeah. Yeah, Patreon has been a big part of my practice for a couple of years now. And I think as well, like I've been sort of doing stuff the way that people are like the model that people are looking at implementing now. I've been doing for a couple of years, which means I've made the mistakes, and I'm able to share that with you. So Patreon's a big part of that. Patreon is a content delivery platform where people can pledge as little as $1 a month to support what you do. And a big thing I find I get from Patreon is there's a lot of people out there who like what I say, like what I do, get value from it, but they're not either financially or they're just not getting enough from me to commit to being coached. Or sometimes there are people for whom coaching just isn't the right choice, like it's not a good fit for them. And so Patreon gives an opportunity for them to to just throw me a couple of dollars a month to support what I do. The money from that I use to train low-income, primarily queer and trans folks who have issues accessing health and fitness, be that financially or be that because they're in places where the health and fitness industry is not particularly welcoming to them.
So that in itself is interesting because you use Patreon, which is essentially a subscription. And I know that people who have heard of Patreon, you probably would have heard about it used by artists or maybe podcasters. So anyone who's producing creative content and wants to give subscribers or fans, if you will, an opportunity to support them. So for example, if you, John, produce content on a regular basis, which I know you do, like you write, you post on Facebook, it's nutrition tips, it's coaching tips, and maybe I can't afford a coach, but maybe I don't want a coach, but I really just like what you do. I could subscribe on Patreon and be only paying you like $2 a month.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And like the benefit of that is if you charge like $60, $70 a session, and that's not any shade on that, I think that that's totally valid, but you will only work with people who can afford that, which from an accessibility standpoint is obviously a problem, but that may not be a priority for you. But from a financial standpoint as well, that means that you're not accessing the market of anyone who maybe just wants a coaching tip or wants to check in occasionally. Like anytime someone reaches out to me for advice, I have this model where I'm happy to give advice no matter what. Like I don't have this, I don't feel I need to gatekeep that. And usually what happens is I'll just ask them to support me on Patreon if they can afterwards. And like a good example of that is I helped someone work out a programming issue that they had with weightlifting 12 months ago. And I just said, hey, just throw you some money on Patreon. It probably took me 10 minutes. And they pledged $5, but they've now been paying me $5 for a year.
Mm.
So like that's $5 a month. And because it's $5, they have no desire to cancel it. And just that thing of I'm going to make myself available, and there's a platform that I can collect money from people who maybe don't fit into the coaching demographic.
Well, and I like that because on one hand, we talk about accessibility for clients, right? Like, so you can work with more clients that way. But from a perspective of a coach or like a small business owner or a gym owner, or maybe if you're trying to shift to being an online coach, if you were to imagine the entire population of this earth and who are your prospective clients? I imagine that your prospective clients probably live in the country that you do, or maybe not if you're an online coach, but they probably at least speak the language that you do. So we're kind of shrinking the pool, right? So maybe you're only going to be working with English speaking people in the world. So we just went from however many billion to a smaller chunk. Of those people, we have to look at people who have access to internet, maybe, and the tools if you're an online coach. So that shrinks it even further. But now if we're only looking at clients that can afford to pay $60 or $70 an hour, we're looking at a fairly small slice of the population. Now, what we're seeing now with the coronavirus is that slice just got smaller. Like, so the slice of the population that can afford you and afford your services just got shrunk as people are getting laid off and losing their jobs and trying to really cut off all the non-essential subscriptions. People are canceling Netflix right now if they can, right? Or Audible, whatever they can do without. So you're talking about, hey, like, why not take that slice and actually expand it? So people can afford $2 a month or $10 a month, and you can provide some value still in return.
And that's such an interesting thing, because when this all happened, particularly because most of my folks who support me on Patreon are in my local community, like they get value from what I do, even if they don't directly benefit it from it. And I prepared myself for a bunch of people to cancel their Patreons because I was like, and I understand that. Like, I was like, this is going to happen. They're making the smart choice for them. No one has canceled. What has happened, I've got multiple emails from people from Patreon being like, so and so has edited their pledge, and I'm like, oh darn. And then I open it and find out that they've opted to pay me more money, which was such an interesting thing because I wasn't expecting it. But people had gone, oh, this is a tough time. Better pay John a bit more money. And that was super like heartening and super heartwarming for me to realize that people had actually taken the time to go, oh, I actually think I should support this more now.
So how do you, I'm curious, like that is so cool to hear. So you have, no one of your Patreon subscribers have canceled so far. And some of them have edited their pledge to pay more. How do you explain that? Because that seems paradoxical, right? Like on the surface, as people are losing jobs and canceling all the things, what you just described seems like a very outside the norm outcome. Why?
I think part of it is that one of the things I've tried to develop over the last couple of years is an abundance-based mindset about all of this sort of stuff. So much of the traditional health and fitness industry has been based around scarcity. Like, we're all competing for the same clients, and you've got to fight to sort of carve out your part, a piece of the market. Like, there's only so many full-paying clients to go around. And I just haven't bought into that, mainly not because I don't think that that's a valid way of building a business, but it just doesn't interest me as a person. If I do that, I end up doing a thing that because my background is in marketing, a thing I intensely dislike, which is competing with other businesses. I would much rather live in a space where all the coaches I encounter, we're all working together. Like, we're not competing with each other. We're competing with folks outside of our industries not understanding the value of a coach. And I'd much rather have that discussion and that sort of that approach rather than fighting with other coaches to get clients. And because I think I've always had that, I like to think that my clients don't see supporting me as a cost benefit thing. Like, I don't think anyone who supports me on Patreon is like, I pledge $5 because I get exactly $5 of value out of it. Because the problem with the cost benefit analysis view of coaching and support and stuff like that is, in crisis, people will always, and it's a smart choice, people will always back off. They'll always go, I can't afford this right now. And there's always a constant pressure as a coach to offer, say, $70 value of coaching. And I think that somewhat is why, I can't fully explain it, but why people are supporting me more now. I think it's because I haven't modeled that scarcity mindset. Like, I think if I was chasing them, being like, oh, your health and fitness is really important, and you need to keep exercising, and really pushing and pushing and pushing, that scarcity mindset would probably sort of infect their thinking about it. But because I'm like, hey, I'm just happy with whatever you can give me, and I'm appreciative, and I know if you have to cancel, it's because this is a crisis, and I understand, people don't get put into that mindset when they think about giving me money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it feels like you kind of jumped over the transactional thing in this business altogether, right? When we say like, oh, like how much do I have to pay you per month, and what am I going to get in return for you paying me this per month, right? You're saying, well, from the beginning, it was just set up differently. And I think that's why we got a lot of interest, because folks heard that it was very different. We can talk about coaching packages and not, and you talked about something that I think just felt very free flowing. And I think something that really resonates, especially right now, because there's just so much uncertainty in the air. I got really curious when you were talking about this policy that you have about just giving advice and never really gatekeeping your advice. I've seen that come up quite a bit, where if you have somebody who is an expert, they might find themselves having trouble like knowing where to draw the line between charging their services for their services and not, right? Like if you're a running coach, or like yourself, if you're a strength coach, if you teach combat sports, and how do you defend yourself, I guess I want to say, from being taken advantage of, that you're not in Facebook all day every day answering questions for free? Or am I asking a wrong question altogether?
I think you hit a brilliant word there that I want to dig into that answers that question, that actually came up on the last Facebook Live in the comments, and I addressed there. Is my philosophy is, if someone is going to take advantage of me, I don't want to work with that person anyway. So like framing it as I constantly have to defend myself from being taken advantage of somewhat puts you into this situation where you're constantly on guard. And I fundamentally like to think of myself as pretty lazy. So I don't want to do unnecessary work. It actually takes me more effort to gatekeep my coaching and to like be really strict about payments. And like with my clients who do pay full price, who usually bulk, like they pay a chunk up front, I just tell them, hey, you track this. I believe whatever you say. And like it's a selection thing where I only work with people that I like and I trust and I think that are not going to try and take advantage of me. Because with my full paying clients, they could try and take advantage of me by like misremembering how many sessions we have.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm really upfront, where I'm just like, I'm just going to believe whatever you say, it tends to filter out those people pretty quickly. And if you are working with a client, and no matter the capacity you think that they're taking advantage of you, I would generally advise you to fire that person.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because if they're approaching it as, how can I get everything out of this with giving as little as possible,
Mm-hmm.
they're actually probably not going to succeed as a client anyway.
Yeah.
Like I find that that's a really good filter. Like if somebody is, well, I want to squeeze as much out of this as possible and give nothing or give as little as possible, no matter how that manifests, whether they take advantage of sliding scale or take advantage of you not having a cancellation policy, at some point you're going to hit a point where you're like, oh, this person's taking advantage of me. So like for me, it's about trusting the people you work with, being selective about the people you work with. And it's much easier as a coach if you just take this approach of, fundamentally, I'm going to try to believe everything that the person in front of me tells me.
Yeah.
But that means maybe I have to refuse to work with certain people. And that for me is as much about my mental health and my well-being as it is about anything to do with how I structure my business. Like,
Yeah.
I think everybody I work with is kind of great.
It's easier to be that way, right? Like I'm almost hearing like it's easier to assume people are good than to assume the opposite, because it's just easier to live that way. I'm remembering a conversation I had with a fellow coach a few years ago, and I was working with, I think, 275 clients at one time. And that coach discovered that my phone number was listed in my Facebook profile. And she got so truly scared for me. She's like, "Oh my God, Kate, I have to tell you this. Like, I think you didn't mean to share your phone number on your Facebook profile, but it's right there." And I was laughing. I said, "No, it's there. I don't really care." She's like, but then like, aren't the clients gonna call you and text you in the middle of the night? And in the 4 years that I've been coaching 200-300 people at a time, not a single person has ever taken advantage of the fact that my phone number was right there. No one has called me in the middle of the night. No one has texted me unsolicited questions. And I think the only times I could think when people have messaged me is when our call would drop and they would message back and said, hey, I'm so sorry to text you on your personal number, but our connection just got lost. And I think that kind of gets into what you're saying of a bigger mindset almost. And I want to shift to maybe chatting a little bit about this idea of pay what you can. What do you think of offering pay what you can right now as a default offering? Like, so I know that you sort of start with that. What do you think about coaches who are considering discounting their services now or shifting it to pay what you can?
So it's really interesting. I'm glad you said discounting, because discounting is different than pay what you can. And that's a really common problem I hit upon with when discussing this with coaches, is conflating those two ideas. Like, you see a lot of coaches right now who feel that they must discount their services. And the thing is, if someone's paying $70 and they're financially doing fine, and you tell them, hey, do you want to pay $50 instead? Every single person is going to say, yes, I would like to pay $50 instead. And they don't need it, because that's a really smart choice. Like, any person will do that. So, like, the first thing with sliding scale is it's not just about offering it a cheaper option. It's also about offering a more expensive option. Like, the goal with sliding scale, purely from a fiscal perspective, not talking about accessibility and your personal ethics and stuff like that, the goal of sliding scale is you end up with more money, or you end up with the same amount of money and more clients.
Can
because
you
more
explain sliding scale, just for those who are not familiar? So what is sliding scale exactly? Maybe like throw some sample numbers in for us too.
Just one second. My studio runs sliding scale, and I have all those numbers in front of me. So we started sliding scale about a year and a half ago. And for us, sliding scale is, for example, these are drop-in prices. So if you're not a member and you just want to come in for one class, accessible is $50. That's our lowest sort of pay up front that's listed on the website. Standard is 30. 30 is pretty much was the price before we moved to sliding scale. So that's the standard. And then generous is 45.
So when I come in for a drop-in class, I can pay $15, $30, or $45 for the same class.
Yeah. And we have a similar format on our workshops and our ongoing class packages. And with the class packages, we used to price it based on you pay for 2 classes a week or 4 classes a week or unlimited classes. But now it's an unlimited package, and your choice is, do I pay the accessible, do I pay the standard, or do I pay the generous?
How do you decide at the door? Because I think the one thing that folks are struggling with is like the wording and the language and the talking around this. Like, if I walk into your gym and I'm looking at 3 prices, how do you, like, I say, hi, I want to take a class. How much is it? And you say?
We have 3 rates. They're accessible, standard, and generous. Pay what you can. And if those options don't work for you and you'd still like to train with us, let's have a conversation about that. Like, when I do sliding scale on private sessions, I generally say $60 is my standard price an hour. 20 is the lowest where people actually pay me money. Mm-hmm. But if 0 is what you can afford, 0 is fine too. And because I've decided to work with that person, and I think we're a good fit, I want them to succeed, generally they pay me something. Mm-hmm. But I'm happy to work with them for free, and that's what the Patreon supports.
So it's really, really important to highlight here, and I just really want to make sure we don't miss this, is that this is very different from saying, I offer free coaching. Instead, what you're talking about is, I want to help. Like, I offer coaching, and these are my services, and these are my standard rates. However, I want to also help folks who cannot afford my standard rates right now. And here are some options. And by providing your standard rate right there and then, you're anchoring the donation, if you will, right? Like there is that baseline, there is that reference point from the very beginning where I say, I'm willing to work with you. My standard rates are this.
Yep. And like, it's about the conversation. Like, we also have a coaching credit pool, which is paid for out of the generous level people, so the folks who pay the higher price for things. And that coaching credit pool allows us to give, like, we have a certain amount of free hours per month. I don't think we've ever hit the cap on it. Like, we've never had to turn anyone away. And people can avail of that. But it's a conversation. Like, we don't just go, hey, it's $0. But if you'd like to pay us some money, that would be great. Like, there's a bunch of options available. We have a conversation about values with people, and I think that that's the thing that coaches hit upon that is the challenge about sliding scale is the discomfort with having the conversation about money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they don't want to have that conversation, so they want to put it on their website. But when you put it on your website, what you end up getting is just people who are like, when you put it, hey, you can pay $0, then what you end up with is price shoppers, which is exactly not they're not the people you offer sliding scale for. But if you put it, hey, I still want to coach you, even if you can't afford to pay for it, let's have a conversation. In my experience, that filters out anybody who's just shopping for the lowest price. And also the people who are just price shopping, like, it's not, I want to pay $0 because that's all I can afford. It's people who are, I want to pay $0 because I don't value the product. They don't succeed anyway. And they're usually not willing to have the conversation. The people who are willing to have the conversation are the people who are like, I value what you do, but I can't afford it right now. And those people are usually incredibly grateful, and they're very reluctant to ask for the help. And there's this whole thing that, well, if people don't pay, they don't buy in, and therefore they don't use coaching. And I just don't think that that's the case when it's people who genuinely can't afford it, who do value the product. I think if you offer a product for $0, you don't get buy-in because people don't value the product. And that affects their success. But if people genuinely really believe in what you do and see that you're committed to doing it and money isn't an issue, they tend to pay what they can. Often that'll be $0. Often it's more. Like, I have very few clients that pay $0. Most of them pay $20, $25 for a time slot I'm in the gym anyway. And I'm the only coach they can go to. There's no one else that they can pay that amount, which means that it's not like if I refuse to coach them, they would come back and give me $70. They wouldn't. I would be stood in the gym doing nothing between other sessions, and they would just not be getting coached.
So Suzanne is actually watching. Hey, Suzanne. She says she really loves the idea of a sliding scale. And Andrea was commenting that she thinks that people have just a really hard time emotionally coming to grips with what they can afford. So it can be a tough conversation, like you pointed out. I saw a question from Kelly. She's wondering, do you limit the number of discounted clients that you accept for one-on-one training, if that's the context we're talking about? So otherwise, trainers with a full book of low-paying clients are not making a living. So how would you address that, John?
That has not been my experience. I haven't met a coach who does low-income training who is working with like a full load of clients who is financially struggling. Conversely, I've met tons of coaches who charge full price, who just can't get enough clients to fill their day. I definitely think it's a valid concern. And I think the idea of limiting slots is a great way to do it, and say, I have 5 low-income slots available. They are paid for by the clients who pay full price, who wants them. And be explicit about your terms. Like, people think because you're doing low-income accessible stuff you just give it away to anybody and don't really like think about who you want to work with and who you want to serve. And the reality is it's as much a process as full paying clients, if not more so. Like full paying clients is often, you gave me $70, sweet, let's do some training. With low income clients, you have to be a lot more engaged in the process and have the conversations. And yeah, put limits on it. Like start with one slot or say, hey, I have a pool of $200 a month that I can offer as low income coaching.
Well, we are talking about different ways you could go about it, right? Because I mean, you could have a coach who works primarily with low income folks, but if I'm a personal trainer or a coach who needs to make a living, who might be concerned about working with only low income folks for that same reason we just discussed, I could absolutely start by offering one pro bono spot. Right. So as your April intake rolls around and you're taking on 10 new clients, maybe one of those 10 you will actually take on for free or heavily discounted. Right. And that can be just a way. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to charge full price of all clients and free or discounted price for all clients. And I have talked about that with some fellow coaches who were asking about like little client presents. So like, let's say if you want to send a card, right, or send a little book in mail, just as a pick me up, the question I would sometimes get is like, well, but I have 40 clients, so it needs to be a present that is applicable to all 40 clients. And now I need to figure out how much that's going to cost and the ship. It's like, or you can just send the one thing to one people out of 40. And then in a week, you can send another thing to another person out of 40. So I think it's just kind of keeping in mind that it's okay to treat different people differently. Like it doesn't have to be an equal one set of rules and one set of prices for everybody that is set in stone. It can be that. And some people find great simplicity in just having one coaching package, one price, and that's it. But I think this is really providing an opportunity for a lot more flexibility in pricing models and how we go about it.
Yeah, and I think that, like I said this to someone in the chat underneath the last live we did, is treat it like you would a client who wants to try something new. Build an experiment, set criteria for how you know it's successful, and just do it. Like, I would never suggest anybody does this overnight, but there's nothing to stop you offering, like one low-income scholarship spot in every program, and you can factor that into your pricing and just be honest with people and just say, hey, I put this into my pricing. Like when you pay full price, you're also supporting this sponsored spot. Please, if you know anybody who would benefit from coaching but cannot afford it, get them to contact me. And you'd be surprised how accepting people are of your regular price when you're completely transparent about what it pays for. Like you're not just sitting on a pile of money, you're like, no, I want to coach people. This is the structure that I'm using to do it. And I think that's really important, is my model won't work for everybody. But I'm hoping that people will see my model and go, oh, hey, the way that I've been told I need to do things isn't the only way to do things.
Well, and the other thing I really want to call out, because I'm sensing a theme in the questions that we're getting. And the theme is a certain amount of worrying and wondering, like, what if, right? I do this thing and just people rip me off and I'm going to be out of money and destitute. And so a couple of things to keep in mind. You don't have to do this forever. You can change your mind. You can take 100 low-income clients and be completely overwhelmed and out of money, and you can say, this is not working, I'm not doing that anymore, right? Like you are allowed to change your mind, to change your offerings, to change your prices. The other thing is I do want to call out that we're not actually talking about a real scenario yet, right? Like this is all about, but what if they do this? And what if they do that? And you don't know if they will, So we're talking about tiny, small steps you can take to try it. And it might be that one discounted spot, one scholarship offering. And you really won't know. In my experience and in John's experience, how do I say this generally? People don't do that. I mean, it sounds so weird when I say that, but people just don't do that. And one example I can give, so when I just finished my book, I wrote a book of personal essays about a year ago, and I shared it on a pay what you want scale. So essentially it was a link to PayPal, and they could enter a number, whatever they wanted, and they could download the book. So the minimum amount that they could enter was $0.00, and there was no maximum. So I think there may, I don't know how many downloads there were, like maybe there were 50, maybe there were 100, but I can give you a range. So the lowest amount that someone has given me for my book was $0, as it should have been, right? Like that was the idea, because I didn't want money to prevent someone from reading the book. The biggest amount that someone has given me for a book was $150. And when I saw that number come in, I was a mess. It was an old friend. I was crying all day. Like, it was an incredibly touching gesture. However, when I took all numbers, all prices that people have given me, someone gave me $10 and somebody gave me 40, 25 and 35. The average price that I ended up getting for that book over all copies downloaded was about 15 bucks, which is what the price is kind of for an ebook, right? Like, so if you went and looked for an ebook, it's on my website now, or on Amazon, you're going to be spending $12, $13, $18. So it all kind of averaged at the end. And this is not to dismiss the kind of worrying, like, don't worry, it's going to work out. But I think a little bit of that, maybe, that don't worry, it will work out. I'm definitely saying that a little bit. John, would you agree?
Oh, there's that amazing Timothy Leary quote where it's like, you jump into the abyss and you find out it's a feather bed, which is exactly been my experience. Is the fear and the anxiety is super valid and like really important, and it's telling you something. But if it stops you doing the thing, you never find out if that fear and that anxiety was valid. It's always going to be a limiting factor on you, right? Is if we see fear and anxiety as a red light rather than a yellow light, and sometimes it is a red light, but a lot of the time it's proceed with caution. It's always going to be a red light. It's always going to limit our practice. And right now, more than ever, we need to be willing to take risks because our industry is fundamentally changing. So, like, I have a feeling that we're talking about, well, people doing the low income thing and struggling. A lot of coaches are going to be struggling if they don't change. And what we're talking about is, how do you engage with change a little bit at a time and try out a new model a little bit at a time and put the plan in place and sort of proceed with caution. And you can do low income coaching and still structure it in a way that it works fiscally. Like, there's this idea that if you offer something to low income folks, you are just going to lose money. But when my school introduced our sliding scale pricing, and we actually had a really good write-up done by the owner of the school, which I'll share again in the comments here later on. When we ran the numbers over a year of offering sliding scale pricing on our workshops, we got about 106% of what our previous income had been. So it went up slightly, but attendance in all of the workshops shot up. So rather than this situation we had had previously where we were making money and we were making enough money to run them, but as a coach, like, I taught a couple of those workshops, they weren't very fulfilling because only a handful of people showed up. We went up to 8 to 12 people per workshop who all had a great time, were telling all their friends about it, and we actually made like 6% more money off of doing that. And that's important as well, is as coaches, it's when we have these conversations, we need to accept that it's not just about the money. Like, we actually like what we do. And so sometimes the money stays the same, but the opportunity to do more and work with more diverse people in and itself is rewarding and gives you the energy to do the things that make money. Like, I would much rather make the same amount of money overall and work with more people who need coaching, because that's what excites me and that's what I enjoy, versus making the same amount of money and spending my time on my phone in the gym because I have these big gaps between clients. I'd rather have someone come in and work in that time, even if that person can't pay me, because I'm in this because I love it. You know what I mean? And I think that that's a big thing about um, the sliding scale stuff. We need to be aware that we can let the fear and the anxiety of not being able to survive overtake from the reason we got into this in the first place, which probably wasn't for money, because let's be fair, most of us who got into this probably struggled with the financial side for a while. And we all know coaches who are struggling, and they still do it because, let's face it, it's really fun. Like, we love what we do. And
So,
I think that's
Coach
sorry?
Zach Pillow is just weighing in here. He's saying that some of his lowest paying clients got the best results. And I'm sure you see that too, John. So there's a lot of nodding, right? That for sure. Folks weighing
Yeah,
in.
and like, that's been my experience as well, is that everyone I've trained low income who has gotten results has become an ambassador for what I do, and they recommend it to their friends, and many of those friends pay full price. Like, the worst case scenario, you coach someone for free for a year and they get great results, and you get incredible testimonials out of that because they feel like they believe in what you're doing because they don't see it as transactional.
Mike Dula weighed in earlier, and I loved that point. He said, think of working with lower income clients now as a marketing strategy for a future, right? And I really want to kind of call that out, because I would say that right now there are folks for whom this is their primary income. And if this is you, be very careful with automatically cutting prices, right, as a knee-jerk response, because you need to make a living as well, and money needs to flow in order for economy to survive. Because if we just all stop charging, then economy will absolutely collapse. So allow the clients who can afford it to support you still, and this is where a sliding scale can come in. And John, I know folks wanted to hear more about the sliding scale, so maybe we'll have you share a link to your gym in the thread later, so they can actually see how those prices are mentioned. And if you are tuning in later, you can actually go to the beginning of this call, because we have talked about the details a little bit in the beginning. So this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I feel like we kind of dug into some intense stuff. I think the one takeaway for me today that I know I'll be sharing with coaches this week and in the weeks that follow is, we've talked about uncomfortable conversations today and how money's just weird and icky sometimes for people, right? Like, I know it can't be for me 100%. So I would say that if you are considering offering discounted coaching or maybe even free coaching, make sure that it's not because you want to avoid talking about money. It's because you are considering alternative ways of helping your clients. And I think the way John approaches is great, as he sets up a certain baseline, like talking about the standard rates that he's charging, and then allowing a couple of options, right? Or still mentioning something like Patreon. Because you notice that example about my book that I gave you? You know what the easiest thing to do would be? For me to drop the link to the download to that book and said, hey, guess what? I wrote a book. Download it. It's right here for free. That would have been the easiest thing to do. And I just want to make sure that as we talk about offering discount or free coaching, we're not doing that. We're just avoiding discomfort around all things money. What about you, John? Any takeaways for you? That was a big one for me. Thank you.
I I really like that you brought up the thing with your phone number, because it highlights what I was saying, that people are going to take advantage of you if you offer sliding scale, are going to take advantage of you at some point in the process. And they're probably just not going to get results. And it's going to be a frustrating experience for everybody, because people who set out to give nothing and get something, like they're and give nothing could be money, but it could also be time and effort and or honesty. Like, we all know those clients as coaches. This is just extending that a little bit to the money thing. Like, you might get one or two people who do try to take advantage of you, and you'll just have to set a hard boundary. The same way as if someone had texted you or called you in the middle of the night and you just ignore it, and then in the morning go, okay, don't do that again. But like, if we try to catastrophize and avoid all that stuff in our how we structure everything, we're putting a lot of hard filters on who we interact with. Giving people the option and then setting boundaries if it becomes apparent that they are trying to take advantage of you is good practice as a coach anyway, regardless of whether we do sliding scale stuff. Money is just a subject where we are very uncomfortable with it. And when we coach our clients, we encourage them to delve into discomfort and get used to being uncomfortable, because that's where change and growth happens. So if you're thinking of doing sliding scale, I would say treat it like we encourage our clients to do, which is create an experiment, step slightly, like what's 1% you could do towards introducing sliding scale.
Are you
see how it works out?
Coach yourself through this?
Shocking, I know. Coaching is applicable to other things as well. But yeah, like, just treat it as if you were treating a client who wanted to try something new and they weren't sure how it was going to go, and be supportive and give it a real earnest chance to work. And if it doesn't work, just be like, cool, what's next? But be open to changing.
If you're thinking of doing something like that, I encourage you to share what you're thinking of in the group, right? Just say, hey, I've heard of this thing. John and Kate talked about it. It sounded awesome. I love it. Here's what I'm thinking of doing. And be very specific. What are you thinking about? Like, the more specific you are, the more feedback we can give you. And feel free to tag me, tag John, tag Robin. We have an amazing team at your fingertips. And I also saw Melissa called me out. She's like, oh my God, there are going to be all these people calling you now. So.
It's amazing.
It's good to be here, you guys. I hope this is useful, and we will see you on the internets. I hope you stay safe. Thank you for this, John.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. And thanks for moderating, Kate. You did awesome.
Thank you.